Just as faith attracts God's presence, fear attracts demonic forces, especially through saying things like, I feel like something bad is about to happen. I always fail at the last minute. I am never lucky. When you use negative words on yourself, you are programming your life for defeat, and monitoring spirits become informed, and they begin to fashion weapons at you to see which one works best. Another point of access is a loose tongue. You will be doing great harm to yourself if you can't control your mouth, or you are the kind of person who believes in saying everything exactly the way it is in their mind. Some of us are in great trouble today because nothing stays locked up within. These words give legal access to monitoring spirits to enforce negative patterns and recurring failures. Worse still, so many of us tend to always share every moment of our lives on the social media. Informations that should be privy are now littered around with exact location, timing, and even upcoming events. Not everyone in your life should have the same level of access, and even those in your inner circle. Caution demands that you still swallow up deep stuff, lest you sell yourself off. Another point to consider is willful sin, which gives spirits the legal access to a person's life. For instance, unrepented sin or habitual sin opens the door for spirits to parade your life because your life is open. And when a person's life is open, anything goes in. Similarly, unforgiveness. Holding on to grudges and bitterness can create an emotional footprint that monitoring spirits can track and exploit. As monitoring spirits observe your life, they can trigger physical manifestations of spiritual warfare, such as nightmares, sudden health problems, or disruptions in your daily life, all in an attempt to see what attack will work best on you. More also, you may experience unusual atmospheres in your home or surroundings, such as feeling watched or a constant sense of unease, whereby you will begin to feel sudden coldness, perceive strange smells, or hear unexplainable noises at intervals. While familiar spirits can typically be referred to as the spiritual shapeshifters, they are demonic entities that are familiar with you and your family history, who often come to you in the form of deceased relatives, friends, or pets. They are like spiritual chameleons. They adopt real-life identities that make you feel like they belong or that there's no cause for alarm. Unlike monitoring spirits, familiar spirits don't just observe, they interact. These spirits are often linked to your bloodline, and they have access to the generational curses, patterns, and behaviors that have been passed down in your family. They know your tendencies, your weak spots, and your emotional triggers. Like you'd be learning, they often appear as someone familiar, a loved one, ancestor, or even a pet you've lost, in an attempt to draw you in emotionally and often deceive you into believing they are harmless or even helpful. But their purpose is far from good. They work to manipulate you into continuing the generational cycle of curses and sin. In 1 Samuel 28:7-20, King Saul, desperate for guidance after being forsaken by God, consulted the witch of Endor to bring up the spirit of Samuel the prophet who was already dead. The familiar spirit appears as Samuel's spirit and delivers a true message that the Philistines would defeat Israel, which happened in 1 Samuel 31:1. Secondly, that Saul and his sons would die the next day, which also happened in 1 Samuel 31:2-6. And lastly, that Israel would fall into the hands of the Philistines, which also happened in 1 Samuel 31:7. For someone listening to this, you may have this question tugging in your heart. Can a familiar spirit prophecy accurately and still not be of God? Yes, absolutely. Let's take a quick look into Deuteronomy 13:1-3, which says, if a prophet arises among you, or a dreamer of dreams, and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder which he spoke, foretold, to you comes to pass. And if he says, let us follow after other gods, whom you have not known, and let us serve and worship them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and mind and all your soul, your entire being. So we see clearly from scriptures that the source of a thing is as important as the message itself. Back to our subject matter, we see in the account of the witch of Endor that familiar spirits are often used to deceive people into believing they're speaking to someone trusted from their past, when in fact they are being manipulated by demonic forces. These spirits are not new creations. They have existed for centuries and are often connected to ancestral bloodlines and generational sin. The Bible shows us that familiar spirits have access to the spiritual DNA of families, which they use in manipulating generational cycles. They gain their power by exploiting familiarity, hence the term familiar spirits, and can lay hold onto patterns in a family's behavior, beliefs, or even unresolved trauma. Familiar spirits gain access to your life through open doors from generational sin. When your family has engaged in idolatry, spiritualism, or witchcraft, and even sexual sins, these spirits inherit their access through your lineage. Unhealed wounds. Spirits can latch on to unresolved emotional pain or loss, particularly if you have unresolved grief over a loved one's death or trauma. Covenants and practices. Sometimes these spirits enter when individuals or families make agreements, knowingly or unknowingly with them, or cause them to engage in spiritual practices that open doors to the demonic realm. Once they establish trust, familiar spirits will try to manipulate your thoughts and emotions, leading you to believe they are for your benefit when they are, in fact, working against you. They will try to keep you in confusion, despair, and even fear, encouraging behaviors that lead you further away from God's will. After projecting fear and other elements of destruction into you, they reinforce generational cycles like addiction, anger, fear, poverty. By keeping you stuck in patterns that have been passed down your family line, they ensure that curses continue to plague your bloodline. Leviticus 26:39-42 warns that these spirits have the ability to enforce the consequences of generational sin. The key differences between these two spirits are: 1. Purpose. The primary goal of monitoring spirit is observation and reporting. They gather intel on you, your movements, and your plans for the enemy to act upon later. While familiar spirits don't just watch, they interact. Their role is to manipulate and deceive by posing as familiar entities, often attempting to bind you to past generational curses and behaviors. For instance, a friend who takes your name, details, and address to a hired assassin who he or she hired, best describes the role of a monitoring spirit, while the assassin plays the major role of a familiar spirit, which is to eliminate based on the information given to him. Second mode of access, monitoring spirits are attracted while familiar spirits are inherited or contracted willfully. 3. Relationship with you. Monitoring spirits remain distant and unseen, but are always watching. And even when they are around you, they do not hurt you directly. They only set you up for destruction. Familiar spirits are familiar with you, often pretending to be loved ones, both dead and alive, ancestors or familiar animals, and they exploit emotional connections to gain influence over your life. There's a common ground. Monitoring and familiar spirits are both wicked, subtle, and dangerous. Their roles differ in tactics, but are united in their mission to steal, kill, and destroy your life, peace, and purpose. Both thrive on secrecy, deception, and manipulation. We've looked at access that grants monitoring and familiar spirits into a person's life. Now let's look at the reasons why they come into a person's life. 1. Unbroken generational curses. Generational curses refer to recurring negative patterns in families due to sins or covenants made by ancestors. For example, it is very common in Nigeria to hear people throw curses at people and include their children. In the case where a young lady is raped and then she goes ahead to issue a curse on both the perpetuator and his seed, whether born or unborn. In cases like this, chances are excellent that the curse will linger for years until a generation decides to break free. 2. Unresolved family sin and iniquity. When a family fails to repent for past sins, the consequences may continue. For instance, if a grandfather was involved in fraudulent business dealings and never sought repentance, later generations might struggle with financial instability or dishonesty, even if they prosper financially. 3. Bloodline spiritual assignments. Some families have spiritual assignments, either divine or satanic. For instance, there are families where the firstborn are dedicated to idols to symbolize allegiance. In such a scenario, those firstborn children may suffer severely from familiar spirits if they refuse to continue in that path. 4. Prophetic destinies. You see, Satan only attacks those he's threatened by. Hence, he sends out monitoring spirits, just like in the case of Jesus, where Herod sent the wise men to find out the exact location of Jesus with a subtle intention of killing him. In the same vein, he often tries to destabilize the prophetic destinies of individuals in a family by sending distractions and misfortunes to prevent an individual from fulfilling their calling. 5. Family altar and spiritual influence. A family altar is a physical symbol of an agreement made in time past. If ancestors worshipped idols and made sacrifices, future generations will experience spiritual bondage, delays, or strange occurrences, like illnesses tied to specific dates because the altar would be demanding for continuity and peradventure. He finds no one to continue. It introduces the influence of familiar and monitoring spirits into the entire bloodline to see who is more prone to surrender. 6. Satanic contracts and vows. Some families have ancestors who made greedy agreement with the kingdom of darkness to enslave their entire generation. For instance, if a forefather vowed that his lineage would always serve a marine spirit in exchange for wealth, his descendants must experience unexplainable spiritual attacks and setbacks. One thing we must understand is, you cannot owe Satan. He is patient enough to watch you exhaust your collateral donation before demanding for your entire life. 7. Inherited strengths and weaknesses. Just as physical traits pass down through DNA, so do spiritual strengths and weaknesses. A family known for intelligence might also struggle with arrogance or rebellion. Likewise, a lineage of gifted preachers might also battle sexual immorality. In fact, inheriting weaknesses is more likely because evil always wants to come first place in a person's life. If your parents are known for negative vices, you as their progeny may also possess similar traits which can give these wicked spirits access into your life. 8. Occult practices in the family line. When ancestors engage in occultism, such as witchcraft, their descendants might unknowingly suffer spiritual oppression, nightmares, or persistent misfortune despite hard work. 9. Idolatry and ancestors' worship. If past generations worshipped idols or consulted mediums, this could open demonic doors. For example, a family that used charms for protection might later experience chronic illnesses that doctors cannot diagnose in the long run. This is because if you have ever bought from the devil, he would never want to let you go. The devil does not have one-time customers. 10. Blood oaths and covenants. Some ancestors made blood covenants for power, protection, or wealth. A family where an ancestor shed blood for power might see recurring patterns of early death or violent deaths in subsequent generations. Like we have seen repeatedly in scriptures, the blood has a voice. Now just imagine you trying to sleep, and then your toddler is crying on the top of her lungs. That alone is frustrating. How much more when a spirit cries through its blood that was innocently shed, just like the blood of Abel. 11. Repeated sin patterns in the family. Your bloodline is a very powerful medium to get across anyone. For example, if a great-grandfather was an adulterer, his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren might battle sexual immorality despite efforts to live righteously. Once you open your window to the devil, he will take over your gate. Sin is the most significant right that the devil has to oppress and harass any believer, because the soul that sinneth shall die. 12th. Demonic rituals and sacrifices made by ancestors. If an ancestor sacrificed children or specially possessed animals to demonic entities, such descendants may suffer from barrenness, miscarriages, or an inability to prosper because those who kill by the sword must also die by the sword. If you ever give the devil a loophole, he will dig a large pit large enough to wipe out an entire lineage. 13. Unrepented sin and disobedience. Sin left unrepented can have long-term consequences. If an ancestor stole land unjustly and never made restitution, the family might experience disputes, legal battles, or mysterious losses. 14. Curses from enemies or rivalries in family history. A rival or enemy who was deeply wrong could speak a curse over a family. For instance, a businessman who was betrayed might curse his betrayer's lineage, which will lead to a pattern of financial downfall. 15th, unforgiveness or bitterness in ancestors. If an ancestor died harboring deep resentment or hatred towards a particular relative, Their descendants might inherit struggles with unforgiveness, broken relationships, or unexplained depression. 16th, divination and spiritism in the family line. If your ancestor was a fortune teller, necromancer, or medium, such a descendant might experience demonic oppression, hear voices, or see visions that cause confusion and fear. 17th, engagement with false religion or mysticism. If a family historically followed false gods or mystical religions, e.g., worship of the sun, moon, or ancestral spirits, such lineage might face spiritual stagnation, confusion, or an inability to connect with God.